This is a special edition of DTNsights. It is the 20-year anniversary of the landfall of Hurricane Katrina. That was an event that I personally worked in Mississippi, and I thought, who better to join me in remembering that event than Mr. Josh Johnson. Josh is the chief meteorologist of WSFA in Montgomery, Alabama. Josh, how are you doing today?
Renny, I'm doing great. I'm doing greater because I am in your presence again. Renny and I work together, and we're not only co-workers, but best of friends. So, Renny, it is always
Absolutely.
good to hear your voice.
It is so great to see you too, and thanks again for joining us. I was thinking back. We go back 20 years ago. There was a couple things true. Number one, the first one was we both had way more hair back then.
That was cool, wasn't it? Hurricane Katrina probably did this to both of us, actually.
I think so. There's some gray in my beard. We're dealing with ageism here a little bit on ourselves, getting a little bit older, but. At the time, Josh, we both worked at a station, WTOK, very near and dear to our hearts in Meridian, Mississippi. For those that are unaware where Meridian is, in Nielsen ratings, I believe at the time, at least, it was market 184. And if you don't know much about markets, not the biggest of TV stations, but by God, the people there were big fans and still are big fans of WTOK. WTOK has launched a lot of careers, especially in the weather field. So many of us can go back and look at our times at WTOK as sort of where we got our start, learn so many lessons. And for you and me, very early in our career, I mean, I was looking, I think I was 23 when this happened, maybe 24.
Right.
You probably about the same, right?
Yeah, I would have turned 23 a month after this hit. So I was 22 at the time.
22 years old, and the people there entrusted us to get them through this storm. But what a life lesson and learning lesson for us to kind of go through this. But Meridian sits about 120 miles from the Mississippi Gulf Coast at the intersection of Interstate 20 and 59, where they join together. It's basically right in between Birmingham, Alabama, and New Orleans. And so it's right in the heart of Hurricane Katrina. Even though we were 120 miles inland, we actually had the eye of the hurricane pass right over the TV station. It still had an eye at that point, which tells you something about the storm, but really fascinating. So I thought we'd start, looking back, Josh, we had this massive hurricane, a Cat 5 at one time approaching the coast. But when you go back 20 years, the technical challenges that existed for us to cover that storm were pretty immense. And in fact, as I look back fondly that we even pulled it off, to be honest with you. At the time, I'll list off a couple of things we can go into. Number one, there was really no social media. I think at that time, 2005, Zuckerberg, you had to be a college student to have Facebook back then, if I remember correctly. And at that time, I was just telling people what I was going to eat for lunch or whatever we put on Facebook back then.
Right.
We didn't have a graphic system at the station that had live radar.
Right.
Literally before any newscast, we had to render the graphic to get the latest radar image, which sort of screwed me over a few times when we had pop-up storms that happened 5 minutes after.
Brutal.
And there was really no internet chat system. I mean, back then we used Yahoo Messenger, if I remember correctly, to even communicate with others in the weather enterprise.
And even that was sort of in its infancy, Yahoo Messenger was. And going back to the graphics thing, we had a system at TOK there where we would, during severe weather coverage, we would be over a radar image, and then the people in the control room knew if I ever stepped off the radar image, that meant that I needed to render a new one. So they would freeze frame the image of the radar without me on the screen. So it looked the same as if I just walked off. I would take the computer out of play mode, render a new image, put it back into play mode, and they knew when I walked back on screen, that meant to change back to the weather computer because I had a new image in. And I mean, this was 20 years ago, but you say that out loud and it makes it sound like we were doing this in 1945, instead of 2005. But the technology's come a long way. Like you said, social media had not, there wasn't mass adoption. There was a younger subset on Facebook, and then your top 8 spaces on MySpace or whatever that was. I wonder what Tom's doing nowadays. Probably counting money on a beach somewhere. But Yeah, the technical challenge, it at times became overwhelming because you know, um, the station lost power, and we were fortunate in that our general manager at the time had been on that job for just a few months, but he was our longtime operations manager. And so he had kind of thought through some of these logistical challenges. So we had a generator brought in, but the problem was it was relatively small. So it would run like two lights, one camera, one weather computer. And I'll never forget our friends at Barron through our late friend, Jason Kelly, one of the best tropical meteorologists in the company. The company had sent him to help us in Meridian. And Jason worked out a deal with our general manager and Barron, and they sent us a Barron Viper system to use. That was the predecessor of Lynx. And that was our computer that we had running because it was superior to the other product. And we were running Yahoo Messenger on that one computer at the peak of the storm because the power was out. The rest of the station internet was out, but the Barron delivery system was still getting us data. So, and I remember James Spann and JB Elliott and Derek Kincaid. And I shouldn't have started naming names because I'm going to leave somebody out. Bill Murray, all those guys were sort of feeding us information on Yahoo Messenger. And I
And
mean,
we
if
had
you can
no
picture this, Renny and I are sitting in a studio that is otherwise completely dark. There's two
one bright
lights.
light. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this bright light right in front of us, one camera, and the only information we have one weather computer with radar on it, and Yahoo Messenger chiming every now and then saying various things. And we knew it was going to be bad. But I think we had a problem, and Renny, I know this is a topic we were going to talk about a little later, but we can kind of segue into it if you want. Um, I don't know that people believed us when we told them how bad this was going to be, and I understand why. I think a big part of the reason for that was Hurricane Dennis. Dennis had hit a month earlier in July, and the southern half of Dennis essentially got eaten away by dry air at landfall, and so it was not as bad as we said it would be. And then a month later, we have to come back and bang the drum harder than we ever have and say, "Look, this is going to be a life-changing hurricane." Did people? How many people sort of said, "Yeah, you guys talked like last time would be bad," and it wasn't. So,
I
um,
there was it was so that made landfall on a Monday, I believe. And I
mhm.
think it was the Friday night before, or even the Saturday night before, after the 10 o'clock news, I went out just to have a drink at a local establishment. I did say I was older than 21 at the time, but barely. Uh, but there was a lady that came up to me that said, hey, I've seen you on TV. Is this really as bad as you say it's going to be? My family is all in Biloxi on the coast. They survived Camille. So Camille was the storm that everybody tried to
Mhm.
sort of put perspective on this. And they said they survived Camille. And I probably, in one of the most bold statements I ever said was, do you want to see them again? Like, I don't know how to put this more in perspective for you. Do you want to see them again? They're like, of course. I said, have them come visit you for the week.
Right.
And uh, I oddly enough ran into that lady probably 3 months later,
Oh, wow.
gave me the biggest hug ever and said, thank you. Their home became a slab property as a result of this. And that was like, I mean, as a young meteorologist, put in perspective that Hurricane Dennis weekend, it was 6 weeks before. That was my first weekend ever on television, was Hurricane Dennis weekend. So I
Welcome,
was six, I
welcome to
was
the big leagues, kid.
yeah, I was 6 weeks into my TV career at that moment when Katrina hit. But I'll never forget that conversation at the establishment, and feeling like you make a difference. But yeah,
It's rare you get to hear the outcome of those types of stories. So that's really
it,
cool that
really
you got
unique.
that full circle moment.
It was, and I mean, when we go into sort of the awe of the storm, there was another moment. I'm curious if you remember this, but we have a joint great friend named Greg Nordstrom.
Oh yeah.
Those who know Greg is a storm chaser and sort of became a prominent hurricane chaser. Lives on near the coast now, but Greg was chasing, believe it or not, chasing Hurricane Katrina. And as part of this coverage, we did a phoner with him.
Oh yeah.
I'll never forget, you were the one talking to him on air at the time, and Like, Greg, you're down on the coast. What do you think? And I'll do my best impression. He's like, man, this thing is crazy. I've never seen wind like this before. This is insane. And just absolute almost terror in what
Right.
he was experiencing. And you go, thanks, Greg. Landfall is still about 4 hours away. And it
I
was one of
remember
the few
that.
times that Greg went
Just
silent.
speechless, just totally
Yes.
speechless, which never happens.
And
Um,
so, yeah, it was just, panic. And it wasn't even really there yet. We were
wasn't
just
even
in the
there
beginning
yet. Yeah,
stages.
it was just such a huge eye wall. I think that was part of the problem. That's what helped drove a lot of the storm surge was just the size of the eye wall. I also remember the conversation I had with Greg. You know, Katrina really blew up that Saturday night into Sunday morning before the Monday morning landfall. And, again, to sort of contextualize all of this, this was back, but the iPhone had not been invented yet. Smartphones were not really a thing. There were Blackberries, but they were cumbersome, and no one really you couldn't really check much weather data on a mobile device. And so Greg had gotten in position down there and called me early that morning, that Sunday morning, the day before landfall, and said, "Hey, how are things looking?" That's what you used to do when you went storm chasing, is you would call back and someone would be giving you data. And he loves to tell this story just because it gives both of us a kind of a chill to think about it. I said, "Greg, there's a super typhoon in the Gulf of Mexico. This thing is it's not just that it's intensified, it's that it has grown in size um, insanely rapidly." Which I think that's probably the difference maker with Katrina. We've seen a lot of storms, especially subsequent to Katrina, that rapidly intensified. We've seen a ton of rapid intensification in hurricanes is becoming almost like the norm. Um, I don't know that we've seen one go from a storm that's this big to a storm that's this big in that amount of time.
And
Um,
maintain its strength too. So it was both size and strength
right,
at the same time. A lot of times you'll get an expansion and maybe the storm doesn't necessarily have that drop of pressure, right? Usually you see rapid intensification, you kind of have a small eye wall and it's sort of a
right.
compact form. This thing
Little buzzsaw storms.
was big in both size and intensity.
And that there was almost no lag. Most hurricanes, when they undergo rapid intensification, particularly a large one like Katrina had become, there's a big pressure drop, and then the wind has to catch up to the pressure, right? Like you get this pressure drop, and then 12 hours later, the wind speeds come up. This one with Katrina, it was just so unusual in that the pressure drop occurred, and then there was an almost instantaneous massive uptick in wind speed too, which worked out in some ways because as the storm approached land, it lost some of those wind speeds. But the problem was those preceding 24 hours before landfall, you had a 300-mile wide eye wall piling up all this water and water and water. And so, that one's tricky. That makes it, from our perspective too, it's tricky because it's not like it was today. It is today. Back then, we didn't have all these live chaser feeds from the coast. Um, so we're getting reports, but they're mainly, you're getting weather data, you're getting wind speed, you're getting how much rain has fallen. There's almost no instantaneous way of seeing the storm surge scenario unfold down there on the coast. So, you're getting these, 95, 100, 125 mile per hour gusts at Gulfport, Pass Christian, and Biloxi, and things are going. It's a bad hurricane. There's no doubt about that. But I just remember being on the air, and the moment that it all changed for me was it was on that Yahoo Messenger. I can't even remember which meteorologist said it, but they passed along a report from the Associated Press that the Harrison County, Mississippi Emergency Management had requested 1,000 body bags. And I mean, it makes me sort of emotional now. Like I'll never forget the feeling I had in that moment. Like we were on the air talking, and my jaw just dropped. I was like, what? That can't be right, because all we're measuring is wind speed, right? Like there's no instantaneous feed showing this wall of storm surge decimating Pass Christian and all the Mississippi coast the way that it did. But when you got that report, you knew, oh my goodness, like this is not like any other storm.
And I think it's very important that you say that because most people associate Katrina, rightfully so, to what occurred in New Orleans even after that. Mississippi got ravaged.
Yeah,
And
Mississippi was a weather disaster. New Orleans was an engineering disaster.
great said, right?
I mean, because that's the you go into the way that they constructed the levee that protects the lower Ninth Ward. They, the Army Corps of Engineers, when they first built it, the metal pilings didn't go deep enough, so there's this soft, peaty, sandy soil underneath it, and that allows them to be not topped but sort of breached. And look, that doesn't mean that the loss of life there is any less significant. It's not. Every life's precious. But that's what I always say. Mississippi was a weather disaster. Katrina, and New Orleans was an engineering disaster. So
And I
it's crazy to think about the Mississippi coast and how it looks now. You go down there now, and but it has taken 24 years. For them to get back.
Absolutely. There, you mentioned the moment where you had that, oh my gosh, with the 1,000 body bags. For me, another landmark moment was when the storm started to shift to the New Orleans problem. We had basically, our weather was starting to wind down in Meridian, and we decided there was a lot that went on. The big thing that remains in my memory was how many people left New Orleans and actually came to Meridian and our surrounding cities in our coverage area in East Mississippi and West Alabama. And our general manager made a great decision and said, we actually need to start telling the story of New Orleans because so many people watching our airwaves, that's their home. That's their family.
Right. That's right.
And so we switched coverage. We started broadcasting the local coverage from New Orleans on our airwaves in Meridian. And there were, it'll make me cry if I tell the stories too in depth here, but there were a few stories that came on air where the impact of life hit us so hard. And so you go back to that scene of, by the way, there was no air conditioning either in that studio. So it was every bit of 85 or 90 degrees with that bright light, dark room, one camera. We were no longer on the air, but we were watching the coverage. And you had about 30 or 40 people standing around watching the tiny TVs that basically through the camera to see what was going on. And that's when it hit me that, oh my gosh, the world changed. And
yeah, this is a landmark disaster in American history.
Yeah, there was a guy missing his family. I recall one of the stories and essentially crying for help on TV.
He was wearing a yellow shirt. I will never forget that. I will never forget that guy. They were on the roof together, and he was holding them, and they were swept away. And I mean, it guts me now. I mean, it's just it feels like 20 years, but the emotions from that storm for everyone who was in Mississippi, Louisiana, New Orleans, anyone, you bring up Katrina, you start talking stories, and boy, it's a gut wrenching. It was a gut wrenching experience, man. And I think a lot about, especially you and I being the age we were. I think that was a very heavy dose of much needed perspective very early in careers when we were kind of young and excited about meteorology and there's this crazy big storm. That was just a massive dose of reality of, this is a people thing, man.
It's a people thing. And, your career has continued in television, a few stops along the way. You've been in Montgomery for a while. For me, getting into teaching and then into the private industry. Interestingly, DTN supports a lot of utilities. And one of the things I remember in the aftermath was how long it took to rebuild even the electrical grid and so many other key portions of infrastructure. I couldn't get a hotel room. So I drove 90 miles every weekend to work at WTOK each way. In this particular case, like I drove 90 miles a day to work there. There was no hotel rooms. It was electrical utilities from literally the entire country. I saw Maine trucks from Maine in town to help rebuild after Katrina. But we talked to so many residents that were from New Orleans that were just didn't even know how to get home.
It was like being in a war zone. They were just refugees. I mean, it really was like being in a foreign war zone where these people are walking around just sort of dazed. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it was.
Our news is starting in about 1 minute. Do you want me to move the rig back somewhere else and we bring it back up, or?
Sure, that would be great. I can chat a few things. I'll pull you off here and tell a couple stories, and then when you're set up, I can bring you back on, Josh, as we get going here. But Katrina was, um, there were stories of. I remember when the storm actually hit in Mississippi, where we were in Meridian. We were inside a quiet studio, a dark studio, as we described, and one of the very interesting things that occurred was um, we actually had people knocking on our door, and they weren't entirely sure where they were. They knew they needed to flee New Orleans, and they essentially came to our doorstep. They saw the TV station and wanted to ask the question, like, "Where am I? I'm trying to get to Panama City or Pensacola." And Josh mentioned that we had another meteorologist helping us, Jason Kelly. He was from the Panama City area and helped. We were just trying to help people. It became a humanitarian effort for us to work with all the people that had fled into Meridian. And then that night, after the storm passed, I had to get back to my hotel where I stayed, and the damage was so unbelievable that I actually had a police escort get me from the station to the hotel. And if I recall correctly, that hotel was probably 5 miles. It took about an hour and a half to get there. We had a police officer and a gentleman with a chainsaw cut their way through trees in order for me to even be able to get back to the hotel. And that's where the awe of the power of even just the wind. So we're not even talking about the flooding that occurred in New Orleans or along the coast. This is 120 miles inland in Mississippi. And, the amount of damage that occurred that far inland, and you get damage that occurs pretty far inland in a hurricane scenario, but to see that occur in Meridian was really breathtaking for me. Afterwards, this is really commonplace in a hurricane. The weather was brilliant in the days that followed, which helped with the cleanup efforts and sort of understanding really the damage that occurred. But we had a wildfire risk that occurred across Mississippi. There was so much tree damage, and that tree damage becomes fuel for wildfires. That was actually one of the most impactful wildfire seasons in Mississippi history, was a result of Hurricane Katrina. So this hurricane had a real unbelievable scope of damage, ranging from flooding, ranging from a wildfire risk after the fact. There were essentially refugees that moved into the area. And we also saw, the stories, Josh, of people when they evacuated going to the Superdome was a really sad portion occurred. And even the Astrodome in Houston became a landing place. And I mean, population changed as a result of Hurricane Katrina. I think Baton Rouge, if I remember, became one of the biggest markets in television for a while because of so many people that had moved from New Orleans to Baton Rouge after that storm.
Yeah, it jumped like I think 30 or 40 market sizes in the rankings there, just because of, again, kind of that what we were talking about before I had to swap locations. My apologies for that. The influx of people, like it literally was like you read these stories, or you see stories on television. Even I've watched documentaries before about these, the war in Bosnia, the war in Afghanistan, all these refugees who flee war-stricken countries. That's really what it was like for not just New Orleans, but Biloxi and Pascagoula and the Mississippi coast, and Slidell and Metairie and a lot of these New Orleans suburbs. I mean, people just literally, and to their credit, they ran for their lives. And it turns out they needed to, right? I mean, had they not made those choices, this whole situation would have been a lot different. And I think that's the question that I have is, as the weather enterprise, as the emergency management enterprise, as the public safety vehicle of the United States, did we learn anything? If Katrina happened again tomorrow, what would the outcome be, and how would it be different? I just remember so many stories of these missed opportunities, like Amtrak. Amtrak offers all of these trains in New Orleans. They say, "Hey, we'll load up all the trains and outbound from New Orleans." And I don't know the specifics, but there was some bureaucratic, infighting that led to none of those trains had people on them. Have we fixed that? You know, um,
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
interesting. Our last episode, actually, in that I recorded for DTNsights, we talked about emergency management and how we tend to get comfortable with thinking that we've made progress, and there are an incredible amount of ways that we've made progress.
Absolutely.
Um, I really believe that. But then you have incidents like the flooding that occurred in Texas,
Hmm.
and it is a really quick reminder that we don't have everything solved. I
Yeah,
think that's
right.
an I think that's an interesting question, though, on if Katrina happened again today in 2025, are we really prepared? I think we'd be more prepared from the standpoint of being able to express the confidence in the storm occurring, right?
Right.
That was really hard. Do you remember what models we were using back then? Was it the
Yeah.
ADA?
Yeah. The ADA, which is really not a very tropically suited model from a
Yeah.
bunch of physics reasons. And then the AVN, which had become the GFS by then, I think, but it's still, I mean, the physics, the
Yeah, it's
computational power, the observational, the ingest of OBS was not, it's apples and oranges.
really different. Yeah.
Can you
And
imagine what the TikTok people would say? Like the meteorologists on TikTok? I mean, in this case, they would have been right had they called for some cataclysmic storm, but there would
yeah,
be a flood of misinformation too. But I think, with the ubiquitousness of social media and digital communication, we would reach more people, but so would bad actors.
yeah, it's interesting, and sort of thinking about those learning lessons. You've also been involved in some major weather events since then. I think maybe the most comparable, and you tell me if you feel differently, is probably the April 27 tornado outbreak that occurred across Alabama.
Mhm.
What are some of those things that you feel like, because you were so involved in Katrina, has helped you as you've gone on since then?
Lots of things. I think that the key one is, and our friend Dave Freeman, who's worked in Kansas for a very long time, has a saying that is really good if you're a young, enthusiastic, energetic meteorologist. Meteorologists get into this field because we're obsessed with weather. We think it's interesting. Um, Tornadoes are the bad guys. People are the good guys.
Yep.
Don't ever forget that. There are human cost to all of these weather disasters. These, as interesting as they may be, there are massive human suffering cost associated with these disasters. That's thing one. Thing two was, it was actually a conversation I had with, again, the late John Johnson, the news director, who I don't know if any news director in the history of television has hired more good meteorologists than John Johnson. That guy had he had an eye, didn't he? I mean,
He did. I don't know why he picked me, to be clear, but
yeah,
for
right. He
everybody
had
else,
two misses on his record, and they're both
yeah,
sitting here
you're
with
looking
you
at him.
today. But
Yeah.
you'd look at the roster that TV station had over the years of people they were able to hire. And they're a smaller market. They're not paying. No one's getting rich working there. But old John was good at hiring meteorologists. But he told me something. Um, it's not what you say; it's what they hear. And at first, you kind of, as a 22-year-old kid, you're like, oh, okay, cool. You made a riddle. But
Yeah.
when you really stop and kind of just marinate on that for a while, say, Wait a minute, he's exactly right. Like, we're speaking weatherese instead of peopleese. We're talking about um, storm surge inundation maps and storm surge height and the onset times of storm surge instead of saying run for your life or this thing is going to kill you. Uh, that helps me more than anything with tornadoes, with hurricanes, with learning to communicate like that. We had a big weather disaster here in 2019. Beauregard, Alabama was hit. 23 people died, a lot of them children. Um, and I just remember stopping at one point during doing the radar work on the storm and just saying, Stop what you're doing. Listen to me right now. Your life is in jeopardy." And I've had people come up to me since then and say, honestly, I was kind of tuning a lot of what you were saying out, Josh. But when you stopped and looked at the camera and paused and said that, it told me something that I didn't think that would ever resonate with me. And I think that's a lesson. It was a great lesson to me. It's a great lesson to broadcasters in general. And I know some watch this, some don't. But just anyone who's communicating weather information, don't speak weatherese, speak peopleese. Um, Talk to them like they're in your living room. Talk to them in a way that is personal. Stop what you're doing every now and then and make eye contact and say and pause too. I'm a huge believer in that nonverbal communication. The natural state of a person's head on television is they're talking. When they stop talking, you pay more attention to what you're about to say.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, and all that for me goes back to Katrina. It all started there. That's where Josh, it's not what you say, it's what they hear.
Yeah.
Duh.
I like I said to the lady at the bar, I just said, do you want to see your family again? I can talk about category 3, 4, 5, Camille, whatever you want to name it. In this moment, you need to express to your family that their life is literally in danger, and you need to they need to make a decision. And I'm so thankful they did. I mean, really, how many things come and go in your life, but like 20 years ago, I remember where I was standing having that conversation. Those are really impactful moments.
They're huge. And that's an example. When I say don't speak weatherese, speak peopleese, you spoke it. I mean, that's the best example I've probably ever heard. If that woman had asked you that question and you had said, well, it's got sustained winds of 175 miles per hour and the storm surge will go up above 25 feet Monday morning. Would her outcome and would her family's outcome have been the same? I don't know. We'll never know. It's a hypothetical. But if you have to ask the question, then you probably already know the answer, right? So anyone in the weather communication world, look, there is a time and a place for science and analysis and data. That's the core and the backbone of what we do. But when you are communicating it, you have to be able to flip a switch and say things like that. Now, you can't go saying them for every storm, but
Yep.
when it's a high-end moment, you need to have some high-end language that you've never used before and some high-end body language that you've never used before.
Absolutely. Josh, you've been so kind with your time. We're going to round out this episode with something very different, which speaks exactly what you talked to. I think about a few seminal moments in weather history and communication history, and give the credit to the National Weather Service here. First one being May 3rd, 99, when a tornado was moving into Moore, Oklahoma, and it was the first tornado emergency issuance. They realized we've got to ramp up. This is real. There was language like that on that April 27, 2011 outbreak, where it was like, this isn't normal.
It's not a normal day.
It's not a normal tornado outbreak, but Katrina had something similar. We're going to round out with that. But first, Josh, I appreciate you let me say it for anybody that listens to this. My career wouldn't be where it is without Josh Johnson in it. And your friendship and mentorship means the world to me. And I look back and, still in my bio to this day, do I talk about Hurricane Katrina, because it was such a monumental moment for me as a really young aspiring meteorologist. You and John Johnson, no relation.
Right.
By the way, were the people that gave me my first chance in this field. And I am forever in debt and in gratitude for you and for John. Rest in peace to him. So thank you so much for that as well.
I don't even know what to say to that, Renny. That is extremely kind. And I will tell you that you are an easy hire. And
well, good.
From the day you started until today, I know John's not with us anymore, but I've always been extremely proud to see all the things you've accomplished. John always was. Anyone I've talked to from those WTOK days would say, "How's Renny doing?" And I said, "Man, he's setting the world on fire. He is just
doing our best."
Whether you're in Kansas City or whatever you moved on to. So always proud of you. Always happy to call you a friend. And I've learned a lot from you. And if I can ever be useful or helpful to you, you always have my number.
Well, thank you, buddy. So we will round out here. This is a very impactful statement from the National Weather Service in New Orleans. And we will go ahead and play this and let you hear what they had to say as this storm approached. 10:11 a.m. Central Daylight Time, Sunday, August 28th, 2005. Urgent. Weather message, National Weather Service, New Orleans, Louisiana. Devastating damage expected. Hurricane Katrina, a most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille of 1969. Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks, perhaps longer. At least one half of well-constructed homes will have roof and wall failure. All gabled roofs will fail, leaving those homes severely damaged or destroyed. The majority of industrial buildings will become non-functional. Partial to complete wall and roof failure is expected. All wood-framed, low-rising apartment buildings will be destroyed. Concrete block, low-rise apartments will sustain major damage, including some wall and roof failure. High-rise office and apartment buildings will sway dangerously, a few to the point of total collapse. All windows will blow out. Airborne debris will be widespread and may include heavy items such as household appliances and even light vehicles. Sport utility vehicles and light trucks will be moved. The blown debris will create additional destruction. Persons, pets, and livestock exposed to the winds will face certain death if struck. Power outages will last for weeks, as most power poles will be down and transformers destroyed. Water shortages will make human suffering incredible by modern standards. The vast majority of native trees will be snapped or uprooted. Only the hardiest will remain standing, but will be totally defoliated. Few crops will remain. Livestock left exposed to the winds will be killed. An inland hurricane wind warning is issued when sustained winds near hurricane force or frequent gusts at or above hurricane force are certain within the next 12 to 24 hours. Once tropical storm and hurricane force winds onset, do not venture outside.